and good morning. I'm here to talk to you about something I'm really passionate about. And it's about a process, even though I'm going to be talking about a building. But it's transformed the way that I've thought about problem solving, commitment, and transformation. I've often said that I wish we could embrace the same spirit of experimentation, disciplined risk-taking that we employ when we create our art, to the same way we make decisions on strategic business strategies and our nonprofit business model. In other words, we tend to employ left-brain thinking when it comes to running our organizations, and right-brain thinking when it comes to creating great art. My experience has been, prior to this project, that such bifurcated processes leaves us with limited experimentation on the business side and feeling like we have too many choices and too little resources on the artistic side. At Seattle Opera, we're not alone in this dilemma. And the US economic downturn in 2008 brought in a type of conservatism that has lasted longer than we ever imagined. During this time, countless decisions have been delayed, big ideas stalled, and we were all left with more questions than answers. Anybody out there had that same experience? I see a lot of heads nodding. Well, as organizations, we quit taking risks, quit asking what was next, and we committed only to things that were too safe to fail. In 2008, Seattle Opera was no different, and it might give you some context to know where Seattle Opera is and where we started from. We're located in the upper corner of the United States, and that's important because we're far away from the shadow of how an opera company is supposed to work. It had become a company that was known for being audacious and being the little opera company that could. It had emerged from the 1962 World's Fair, focused on the future, on Century 21, and its first big opportunity to produce opera wasn't anything small. It was Aida. And then shortly thereafter, it started producing Wagner's Ring Cycle. And then it did so every 4 years thereafter. And for those of you that aren't opera buffs, that's equivalent to producing the Opera Olympics and being the hosting city at the same time. It also had this audacious experience, and it's part of its core competency. So in 1971, it decided to partner with Pete Townsend and The Who and presented the rock opera Tommy in live form. This was just after the album and before the movie, and it even featured Bette Midler as the Acid Queen. Besides producing for the stage, Seattle Opera also played a critical part in the physical area that it produced and transforming its performance facility most recently. We were performing in the brick fortress known as the Opera House, and we transformed that into something that was no longer a non-inviting public building, but also now a celebration of light and glass. It took a very large and formal auditorium and transformed that into a more intimate configuration that focuses on the stage and uses theatrical lighting and stage-oriented seating. Over the last 50 years, Seattle Opera has built an international reputation for producing the Ring, but it also grew into a company that went from presenting to producing, art making, every aspect of the art form, from discovering and training singers, creating new productions for itself and others, and reinventing how stage technology works, such as how Rhine Maidens fly, scenery is projected, and how materials are repurposed. Let's take a look. So as you can see, Seattle Opera continued to reinvent itself, and today it's a fully equipped producing company. We now include a fully standalone scenery studio, a fully equipped costume shop, and rehearsal facilities that can barely handle the ring cycle in our growing community programming. It also meant that as an opera company, we found ourselves spending just as much time in the transportation business, trucking and logistics, as in the art-making business. And you can see from this image, hopefully you can see, that we are now actually spending time on all of the major freeway corridors in the Seattle area. For every production, we send at least 5 52-feet semi-trucks on the road. We expend 20,000 miles of traveling, and that's 2 tons of carbon emissions. And when we do the ring cycle, it's 10 times that much. If you know anything about Seattle traffic, that's a lot of labor hours not spent in the art-making business. So let me go back to this major remodel of our opera house. In order to allow that to happen, we performed in a temporary venue called Mercer Arena, and it shares a wall with McCaw Hall. At that time, we called it Same Great Opera, One Door Down. But that led to what I'm going to call law number 1 in the art of reinvention. Great ideas are closer than you think. Mercer Arena was ready to be mothballed after our brief stay due to seismic issues, and it would no longer allow for public assembly. The idea was to take what was ice rinka and hockey stage and take advantage of that shared wall, put our scenic studio, and align that with the performance stage and the suite of rehearsal studios. And we would also consolidate our various cottage industries and spend more time in the art-making business than in the trucking and transportation business. After 2 years of negotiations and city political maneuvering, we secured the opportunity for a ground lease, and planning began, how to transform an Innovator business practices into one ideal location. Architects were hired, and our fundraising campaign with our board began, and a grand vision was developed. It was the summer of 2008, and we were on a roll. Well, 2 months later, many of you may remember this, but if you don't, I'll take you down a trip of memory lane in September of 2008. From that period, the financial crisis began, and one of the biggest bank failures happened right in our own back door with the closing of Washington Mutual. Like most organizations, we cautiously pressed the pause button, and then the second guessing began. We developed several scenarios thinking that we can handle this. And the first scenario that was brought forward was we'd stay in the transportation and trucking business. We'd done it for this long, we could do it for a little bit longer. We would still move into this nice opportunity to be adjacent to our performance facility. And we would remodel that building and put on a new facade. As the recession lingered, we took that plan and forget the new facade. We would just take it as is, put in a few windows, and make it functional. And then finally, the board was on the brink of abandoning the idea altogether. And we discussed securing a longer lease or perhaps moving our operations to the suburbs, more trucking and transportation. So we had reached a critical crossroads. This wasn't just put the project on the shelf, it was really a quit or commit moment. Our board was divided, risk aversion was rampant, and imagination seemed to have evaporated. I think all of us have been there at some point in our organizations. So what did we do? Here's where the second and third laws of reinvention come in. We assembled a group of enthusiasts and followed the energy. We were humble and vulnerable. We asked for advice. Faced with what I knew, and those of us who understood how Seattle Opera could be transformed, this was a once-in-a-lifetime project. So we asked for recommendations of experienced and successful problem solvers, people from our own community. It was a team made up of staff, board leadership, thought leaders in the area of environmental conservation, real estate, government affairs, fundraising, cultural development, and we brought them all together around one table. And then we employed the fourth law of reinvention. Don't be afraid to put your biggest fears and your biggest hopes on the table simultaneously. Many of us tend to do it one at a time. Put them there so you can look at them evenly. For Seattle Opera, we were in a rented space in the heart of the Amazon campus. We knew if we didn't make a plan, there would be a good chance that we would be homeless. We also know if we thought big, we had the opportunity to transform our business to free up more resources for art making. So we looked at both alternatives, the fears and quitting scenarios and the hopes and committing scenarios. And we took the best ideas forward. We discovered if you have an unsolvable problem or you're stuck, start making your table bigger and start broadening the conversation. So what happened? We gave ourselves time for discussion and figuring things out, but not too much time. We met and continue to meet weekly with our thought leaders. We created a concrete timetable which goes to the fifth law of reinvention. Fix the amount of time for discussion, debate, and decision-making. By not doing so, you are destined to go into the dreaded spin and second-guessing cycle. My advice to you, take everything you can to stay out of that cycle. And we gave ourselves 3 months. And this is what we looked at. We looked at what would happen if we made the project more than opera. Some of the ideas that we developed included co-locating our PBS affiliate with us, creating a suite of nonprofits, putting a boutique hotel on top, and most recently, considering affordable housing. Basically, we were increasing the public benefit equation. We also looked at various funding scenarios more than the traditional capital campaign. We looked at federal programs such as EB-5, engaging the real estate and neighborhood community development programs. We looked at creating value through existing real estate assets, tax credits, bonding capacity. And in June 2014, Seattle Opera pushed the go button to move this project forward. So happy ending? Not quite. What I've learned is that these projects go through many quit and commit experiences. I've learned to expect it, embrace it, and be ready for it. At this point, we're at the crossroads where you can see we have just as many ideas and opportunities, and we find ourselves asking the questions such as, is it too risky? Are the new funding ideas sustainable? Will we lose control in a multi-partner project? Is it too complex? Can we do this within the timetable set before us? And how do we become experts at affordable housing? Basically, what can we commit to? And here's where the final law of reinvention comes in, and my favorite. Shampoo, rinse, and repeat. Basically, rather than narrow it down to a quit or commit scenario, we look for which particular ideas have resonancy, bubble up to the top. We edit and get rid of those that don't, and we go through the reinvention cycle again. So I really encourage you to look beyond what your own organization can do, because great ideas are close. Don't be afraid to broaden your table. You know what? You don't have to be the expert. Be humble, be vulnerable. That's what we in arts organizations are best at. Put your biggest fears and your biggest hopes on the table together. Don't separate them. Fix the amount of time for discussion and debate, and again, then do it all over again. So many of you may be thinking that the law of reinvention only applies to these large bricks and mortar projects. but you're quite wrong. At Seattle Opera, we've had many opportunities to apply reinvention to our day-to-day business in areas such as relooking at our mission statement, preparing for major leadership change, how we create new work like community sourcing, union negotiations, how we reposition and rebrand our organization, how do we use research to inform our practices, and as we approach strategic planning, how do we reinvent that process? So at the end of the day, I've discovered that the art of reinvention is really not about finding the right idea. It is more about creating an environment where the new can exist with the old, and neither are so precious that they cannot be changed, edited, or improved upon. I challenge each and every one of you to examine your organizations, revisit those best practices, and look for opportunities to employ the art of reinvention. Because what I have found is great ideas are closer than you think, and our field depends upon them. Thank you very much.